The morning air carried the sharp edge of winter's last breath. Thin streaks of sunlight pierced through the whispering pines, scattering gold dust across the narrow road that cut through the valley. Wade Hollister rode slowly, his dapple-gray mare moving with the steady rhythm of a man who had nowhere to rush and nothing left to lose. He'd been up before dawn, like always, habit drilled into his bones since the war. 6 months alone on his ranch had left him lean, quiet, and a little too used to the company of silence. His beard had gone wild, his clothes bore the scent of saddle leather, smoke, and solitude. He didn't care. The world hadn't given him much reason to anymore. The sign at the edge of town, "Welcome to Whispering Pines, population 312, swayed in the mountain breeze. Wade hadn't seen the place in nearly half a year. He'd come for salt, coffee, sugar, and a few boxes of ammunition. That was the plan. In and out before nightfall. But the West had its own kind of plans. Quiet, patient, and cruel. Dust swirled around his boots as he dismounted in front of Holcomb's general store. The hinges of the wooden door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of coffee beans, tobacco, and dry goods, comforting in a way that made him almost homesick. "Morning," said the storekeeper, a thin man with spectacles and an easy smile. "Can I help you, stranger?" Wade nodded. "Flour, salt pork, coffee, and a box of 44 Winchester rounds, if you've got any left." The man scribbled notes, calling for his boy to fetch the supplies. Wade took off his hat, rubbed the back of his neck, and let his eyes wander across the shelves. Then, a woman screamed. The sound cut through the quiet like a gunshot. Wade turned toward the window just in time to see a commotion outside. A man was shouting, his voice drunk and mean. Dust kicked up where a young woman struggled to pull free from his grip. Her basket had spilled across the street, apples rolling into the dirt, pages of paper fluttering like frightened birds. "Aw, hell," muttered the storekeeper. "That's Frank Tillman again." Wade's eyes narrowed. "Who's the girl?" "Name's Akacheta. Teaches the mixed blood kids on the edge of town. Her daddy was Apache, her mama white. Folks don't take kindly to that sort around here." Wade's jaw tightened. "Looks like Tillman's taken more than an interest." The storekeeper sighed. "Girl's father left her nothing but a cabin and debts. Tillman wants the land, and he don't like hearing no." Wade's hand fell instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Finish packing my supplies," he said. "I'll be right back." The bell above the door jingled as Wade stepped outside. The wind carried the faint clang of the blacksmith's hammer and the low murmur of townsfolk gathering, too curious or too cowardly to step in. Tillman, red-faced and sweating whiskey, gripped the girl's arm hard enough to make her wince. "I told you, girl," he slurred. "You ain't got a choice. Your pa's gone and that land's worth more than you are." Akacheta's voice was steady, defiant. "Let go of me, Mr. Tillman. I said no." Her accent carried a soft rhythm of the Southwest, part mountain, part desert. Even covered in dust, she stood proud, chin lifted like she'd rather die than beg. Wade crossed the street, boots crunching gravel. The crowd parted silently. He stopped a few feet away, voice low and even. "The lady said no, mister. Let her go." Tillman turned, sneering. "Mind your damn business, rancher. I just made it my business." Wade's tone didn't rise, but something in it, the quiet promise of violence, made Tillman's hand twitch away from his holster. The girl yanked her arm free, stepping back toward the wooden porch, breathing hard but unbroken. Her hair, dark as wet earth, had come loose from its braid, and the afternoon sun caught the green in her eyes, bright and fierce as the edge of a blade. Tillman spat into the dirt, You'll regret this, stranger. Ain't no law in this town gonna save a redskin's whore. Wade's voice turned to steel. Then it's a good thing I ain't the law. The air hung heavy. For a long second, the only sound was the flap of a loose sign in the wind. Then Tillman's confidence cracked. He looked around, realized the crowd wasn't with him, and muttered something under his breath before stumbling off towards the saloon. Wade watched him go, the muscles in his jaw tightening. He turned back to the woman. You all right, miss? She nodded, brushing dust from her skirt. I'm fine. Her voice trembled only slightly. Thank you. Didn't do it for thanks. Wade tipped his hat. You should be more careful. Vultures like him circle when they smell weakness. Her eyes flashed. I'm not weak. He almost smiled. Didn't say you were. She looked at him then, not as a stranger, but as if trying to read what kind of man would stand between her and danger without knowing her name. Akacheta, she said finally, extending a hand. That means fighter in my father's tongue. Wade hesitated, then shook her hand. Wade Hollister. Thank you, Mr. Hollister, though you might have just made yourself an enemy. Wouldn't be the first time, he said simply. The wind picked up, swirling dust around their boots. For a moment, neither of them moved. The town had gone back to its rhythm. The creak of wagon wheels, the clatter of a blacksmith's hammer, the far-off whinny of horses. But something had shifted. Akacheta gathered her things. A child's notebook lay half-buried in the dirt. Wade stooped to pick it up and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed, just a whisper of contact, but enough to send an unfamiliar jolt through his chest. You teach? He asked. Yes, she said softly. Reading, writing, to those the world would rather forget. Wade studied her. This girl who stood half in one world and half in another, shoulders squared against the weight of both. That's a hard road, he said. She gave a small, tired smile. All the good ones are. Then she turned and walked away, the late afternoon sun catching her hair like fire. Wade stood there longer than he meant to, hat in hand, watching her disappear down the dusty street toward the edge of town. He didn't believe in fate. The war had burned that out of him years ago, but as the shadows lengthened and the wind shifted over the mountains, he couldn't shake the feeling that the day he rode into Whispering Pines for salt and coffee, something else had started. A story written long before he knew he was part of it. He mounted his horse, glancing once more toward the road where she'd gone, and murmured under his breath, Guess I'll be staying a while. The mare snorted softly as if in agreement, and the town swallowed him again. Another ghost wandering through the twilight, unaware that he had just crossed paths with the fire that would change his life forever. The rain came early that evening, rolling in low and heavy from the west, the kind of rain that made the tin roofs moan and the lantern lights blur. Wade Hollister pulled his collar up as he tied his mare under the awning outside Perkins' boarding house. The smell of wet pine and horse sweat clung to him when he stepped through the door. Inside, warmth greeted him like an old friend he hadn't seen in years. The main room glowed with soft lamplight, and the faint aroma of stew filled the air. Behind the counter stood May Perkins, a stout woman in her 50s with quick eyes and a voice that carried the comfort of home. Well, Lord above, you look like you've wrestled a dust storm and lost, she said, handing him a towel. Close enough, Wade muttered, wiping rain from his beard. Rooms are $2, supper's included. You'll find hot water out back for a bath if you need it. That'll do. May studied him a moment longer, that motherly instinct she'd never quite turned off. You're welcome here, Mr. Hollister. Whispering Pines may be rough around the edges, but my table's still civil. He nodded, grateful in his quiet way. Appreciate it, ma'am. Dinner was served in a long, creaky dining room where travelers came and went, talking low over chipped plates. The rain drummed a steady rhythm on the roof. Steady, certain, relentless. Wade sat at one end of the table, keeping to himself, spooning stew that tasted of salt and pepper and honest labor. He was halfway through when the door opened again. And there she was. Akacheta. Her dark hair was braided down her back, the ends tied with a strip of faded blue cloth. The light from the lantern caught the copper undertones in her skin. She wasn't dressed like the townswomen. No frills, no lace, just a simple dress and a worn shawl. But to Wade, she carried the kind of quiet grace that made the whole room pause for a heartbeat. May looked up from her pot. "Evenin', Miss Akacheta. Here for the little ones again?" "Yes, ma'am," she said softly, her voice lilting like wind through canyon reeds. "They've been practicing their letters. I thought I'd read to them after supper." "Well, you sit yourself down and eat first. A woman can't teach on an empty stomach." Akacheta smiled politely and took the seat across from Wade without seeming to notice him. But when she finally lifted her eyes, recognition flickered. "Mr. Hollister," she said, almost surprised. "Ma'am," he answered, setting his spoon aside. May perked up. "So you two know each other already?" Wade nodded. "Met her in town earlier. Some fool thought he could push his luck." May snorted. "Frank Tillman, no doubt. That man's got more liquor than sense." Akacheta didn't flinch, but her hands tightened slightly around her fork. "He doesn't take no for an answer." Wade leaned back, studying her. "That kind of man only understands one kind of language." "And that would be?" she asked. He gave a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The kind that starts with a colt and ends with silence." She frowned, not in fear, but disappointment. "Violence breeds more violence, Mr. Hollister." "Maybe, but sometimes it's the only thing that listens." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain outside filled the space between them. Then May chuckled from her corner. "Well, as long as y'all ain't shooting each other, you can finish your supper in peace." Akacheta smiled faintly at that, her defenses softening. "I'll try not to cause any more gunfire tonight." That earned a quiet laugh from Wade, his first in months. Later, after most of the guests had turned in, Wade found himself standing by the fire in the parlor. The flames painted the room in gold and shadow, and the ticking of the clock seemed louder than it should. He wasn't waiting for anything, or so he told himself. But then, she appeared again. Akacheta stepped into the parlor with a worn book clutched to her chest, her shawl draped around her shoulders. She looked surprised to see him there, but didn't retreat. Instead, she sat near the fire, opened the book, and began reading softly. The words were from The Pilgrim's Progress, her voice steady, melodic, carrying an echo of both worlds she came from. Wade leaned back in his chair, watching her lips move, the way her brow furrowed slightly when she read something sad. "Your students like that book?" he asked finally. "They do," she said without looking up. "It teaches them to hope." "You really think hope works out here?" She closed the book gently, her gaze meeting his. "If we don't believe in something better, Mr. Hollister, then what are we fighting for?" Wade stared into the fire. "I stopped fighting a long time ago." "Maybe you stopped for the wrong reasons," she said quietly. He almost laughed at that. Almost. The peace was broken by a sudden pounding on the front door. 3 heavy knocks that made the windows rattle. May burst in from the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron. "Good Lord, who's banging like that in this weather?" Wade was already on his feet. "Stay back." The pounding came again, followed by a slurred voice shouting over the storm. "Akacheta! You in there, girl? You think you can hide from me?" Frank Tillman. The name carried more venom than thunder. Wade's eyes went cold. He drew his Colt, the metal gleaming dull in the firelight. May reached under the counter and pulled out an old shotgun, checking the chamber with the precision of a woman who'd done it before. "That man's got the devil in him," she muttered. Wade stepped toward the door. "Frank," he called, his tone calm but sharp as barbed wire. "You're 1 second away from hell." There was silence, broken only by rain hammering against the porch. Then Tillman's voice came again, softer, almost taunting. "You think she's worth dying for, stranger?" Wade didn't answer. He just cocked the hammer. Click. Something about that sound carried finality. Even through the storm, Tillman must have felt it. A muttered curse, boots scraping against the porch, and then footsteps retreating into the rain. May lowered her shotgun. "He'll be back," she said. "Yeah," Wade replied, "but next time he won't knock." Hours later, the storm still hadn't let up. The boarding house creaked and sighed with the wind. Most of the guests slept through it, but Wade couldn't. He sat by the dying fire, turning his hat in his hands, watching embers fade like dying stars. Akacheta came down quietly from the upstairs hall, her footsteps barely audible on the wooden floor. She carried a blanket around her shoulders and a look in her eyes that made the whole room feel smaller. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. "Never could, when it rains." She nodded. "My father used to say thunder was the sound of warriors riding across the sky. I used to believe it. Maybe it still is." She smiled faintly, sitting across from him. "You don't talk like most men in this town." "I ain't like most men in this town." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Just heavy. Honest. Two people sitting across from one another, with nothing left to hide behind but the truth. "You risked yourself for me today," she said after a moment. "Why?" Wade looked into the flames. "Maybe because I saw someone standing where I used to stand, fighting a battle they shouldn't have to fight alone." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You don't even know me." He met her eyes then, steady and sure. "I don't have to." Outside, the wind softened. The rain fell gentler now, like the earth was finally exhaling. They sat there long after the fire burned low. Two souls battered by different storms, finding in each other a flicker of something that felt dangerously close to faith. When Akacheta finally rose to go, she paused in the doorway. "Good night, Mr. Hollister." "Good night, Miss Akacheta," he said, his voice low. And as the door closed behind her, Wade realized the strangest thing of all. For the first time in years, he wasn't listening to the rain. He was listening for her footsteps. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and quiet. The road through whispering pines glistened under the pale morning sun, puddles reflecting the sky like pieces of broken glass. Wade Hollister led his mare down Main Street, saddlebags full, coat still damp from the night before. He'd told himself it was time to leave, time to go back to the hills where things made sense, where men worked, ate, and slept without asking for trouble or finding it. But trouble had a way of finding him. He stopped by Holcomb's general store to settle his bill. The old shopkeeper was sweeping the porch, his face tight. "Morning, Wade," he said quietly. "You hear the news?" Wade adjusted his hat. "Not yet. Don't think I want to." "Maybe you should." Holcomb lowered his voice. "Tillman was here at dawn. Bought rope and kerosene. Ain't hard to guess what for." The words hit Wade like a hammer. He didn't ask questions. Didn't need to. He'd seen that look before. The look of a man planning something mean and final. Holcomb kept talking, but Wade barely heard him. His boots were already moving, carrying him down the street toward his horse. His rational mind told him to ride north, leave town behind. Let the law, what little there was, handle its own devils. But his gut said otherwise. He swung into the saddle and turned the mare toward the hills. The morning air was sharp with pine and the faint, acrid scent of oil. The road wound past the church and out toward the edge of town, where the land opened wide. From a distance, Wade spotted the little cabin, a weathered structure tucked between cottonwoods, the chimney breathing thin smoke. He slowed his horse and listened. Children's laughter floated on the breeze. Akacheta was there, standing before a rough plank chalkboard, her voice soft but firm as she guided a group of children through their lessons. Her words carried across the yard, calm and steady, like a song the earth itself remembered. She looked different in the daylight, not fragile, but strong in that quiet, unyielding way that reminded Wade of the land around her. Half Apache, half white, she didn't belong to either world, and yet she stood tall in both. Wade dismounted and tied his mare to the fence post. The children glanced his way, some curious, some shy. Akacheta turned, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Mr. Hollister," she said, brushing dust from her skirt. "You came back." "Guess I did." Wade settled himself on the porch rail, hat low against the sun. "Couldn't resist your lessons." Her smile was brief, tired but real. "You'll have to pay attention then. My students are sharper than most grown men I know." Wade chuckled under his breath. "I'll take my chances." The morning passed slow and easy, the kind of quiet that made a man forget the weight he carried. Wade watched her write words on the board with white chalk: river, sky, home. The children repeated after her, their voices a patchwork of accents and laughter. For the first time in months, maybe years, Wade felt something shift inside. It wasn't peace. He didn't believe in that. But it was close enough to remember what it used to feel like. When the children finally ran off, Akacheta gathered her books. Wade stepped up beside her, offering to carry the stack. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he replied simply, and took them anyway. Their hands brushed just a second's touch, but it lingered longer than it should have. "You shouldn't have come back," she said quietly as they reached the door. "Tillman won't forget what happened. I ain't in the business of forgetting either." She looked at him then, her green eyes fierce against the morning light. "He won't stop until he gets what he wants." "And what's that?" "Me," she said flatly. "And my land." Wade's jaw hardened. "Then he'll have to go through me first." By late afternoon, the calm had turned to unease. The sky was bright, but the air had that charged stillness that comes before a storm. Not the kind that carried rain, but the kind that carried blood. Wade had stayed close, fixing the fence line while Akacheta prepared supper inside. Every creak in the wind made his hand twitch toward his gun. It didn't take long. The first warning came as a rock crashed through the front window, scattering shards of glass across the floor. Then came the shouting. "Come out, girl. We'll make this quick if you don't fight." Wade's instincts took over. He was at the door in 2 strides, gun drawn, eyes scanning the yard. Frank Tillman stood at the front gate, flanked by 3 men, one holding a rifle, another gripping a jug of kerosene. Tillman's smile was crooked and mean. "Evenin', Hollister. You should have kept riding." "I still could," Wade said evenly, "if you walk away right now." Tillman laughed, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you? This here's Apache land, trash land, and I'm just taking out the garbage." Behind him, one of the men smashed another window. Another uncorked the kerosene, splashing it across the porch steps. The scent hit Wade hard, sharp, oily, unmistakable. He moved fast. The first shot split the air, his bullet catching Tillman square in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. The man with the rifle jerked in surprise, and Wade's second shot shattered his gun hand. The third man froze, eyes wide, then dropped his weapon and ran for the trees. Smoke from the spilled kerosene rose in the heat of the gunfire, curling like dark fingers into the evening light. Tillman stumbled backward, clutching his arm. "You son of a—" "Don't," Wade said quietly, the Colt still leveled. "You've lost." Tillman's face twisted with hate, his good hand twitching near his belt, but he saw the look in Wade's eyes, the kind that promised death without hesitation. He spat blood into the dirt. "This ain't over," he rasped. "Not by a long shot. Seems to me it just ended." Wade didn't shoot again. He didn't have to. The fear in Tillman's eyes said enough. The wounded man turned and staggered toward his horse, his men limping after him. The echo of hoofbeats faded into the distance. When it was over, the silence felt louder than the gunfire had. Wade holstered his weapon and turned toward the house. The front door creaked open. Akacheta stood framed in the doorway, her father's old shotgun trembling in her hands. The barrel was too heavy for her small frame, but her stance was steady, her eyes bright and cold. "They won't stop," she said. Her voice was low, shaking but defiant. Wade met her gaze, the steel in his own matching hers. "Then I won't either." For a long moment, neither spoke. The smell of kerosene hung thick in the air, harsh and bitter, mingling with the acrid tang of gunpowder. Smoke still curled from the broken windows. Finally, Wade stepped closer, taking the shotgun gently from her hands. "You did good," he said softly. "But next time, let me do the shootin'." Her lips quirked in a ghost of a smile. "You think there'll be a next time?" "I know there will." He glanced toward the dark line of the pines. "Men like Tillman don't quit till someone makes them." "And you think that someone's you?" Wade holstered his Colt and exhaled. "I don't think, I know." She studied him, the lamplight flickering across her face, half shadow, half flame. "You could still leave, Wade. Ride back to your ranch. Pretend you never saw me." He shook his head slowly. Too late for that. Outside, the last of the sunlight slipped behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of dying embers. Inside, the small cabin glowed with the fragile warmth of a single lantern. And as Wade stood there, the smell of smoke and danger still heavy in the air, he knew that line between his world and hers had been burned away, same as the kerosene on her porch. Whatever came next, he wasn't riding alone anymore. By sunrise, the news had already spread through Whispering Pines like wildfire. 3 shots fired out by the old Apache cabin, Frank Tillman wounded, and his men scattered like coyotes. The townsfolk gathered outside the general store, whispering over coffee and chewing tobacco. Some called Wade Hollister a fool for sticking his neck out. Others said he was a hero. But in a place like Whispering Pines, heroism had a short memory, and gossip lasted forever. Wade didn't care what they said. He was at the blacksmith's by mid-morning, checking the damage to his saddle rig and trying to shake off the restless heat that had burned in his chest since last night. Holcomb came limping down the boardwalk, wiping his hands on a rag. "Town's got your name in every mouth today, Hollister." Wade grunted. "Ain't the first time, won't be the last." "Maybe, but this time it's different. Folks don't take kindly to a man standing up for Apache blood." Wade turned, his gaze cool as a desert morning. "Then they can stop taking kindly to me." Holcomb studied him a second. You're playing with fire, son. Tillman's got friends, money, influence, and more guns than brains." Wade didn't answer. He just hitched his coat tighter around his shoulders and stepped into the street, boots heavy in the dust. He wasn't headed anywhere in particular, but his horse knew. It always did. By noon, he was at the cabin again. Smoke still lingered faintly from the night before. The broken window had been boarded up, and the spilled kerosene left a dark scar across the porch planks. Through the open door, Wade saw Akacheta sweeping glass off the floor, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied back with a leather cord. She looked up when he entered, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly. "Never was much good at doing what I should," he replied, setting his hat on the table. "You all right?" "I'm fine," she said, though the bruise on her arm told another story. "I brought something." Wade placed a small leather pouch on the table, heavy with the dull jingle of coins. "Enough to pay what you owe the bank. You can start fresh." Akacheta froze, her fingers tightening around the broom handle. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means you don't have to fight this alone." Her eyes flashed. "I'm not your charity case, Mr. Hollister." "It ain't charity," Wade said quietly. "It's what's right." "No." She shook her head, voice sharp now. "You think because you helped me once, I'll let you buy me out of debt? I've worked my whole life for that land. My father died for it. You can't just pay it off like it's a sack of beans." Wade took a breath, steady and slow. "I ain't trying to own you, Akacheta. I'm trying to help you stand." "I've been standing my whole life," she said, her voice breaking just enough to sting. "You think I don't know what it's like to have men look down on me? Call me half-breed, outcast, savage?" She stepped closer, tears glinting in the corner of her eyes but never falling. "I won't owe another man anything, not even the one who saved me." The words hit harder than any bullet. For a long moment, Wade said nothing. The wind pushed through the open window, carrying the faint smell of pine and smoke. Finally, he nodded once. "All right, I get it." He turned toward the door, hat in hand. "But I ain't gonna stop looking out for you." She didn't answer. That evening, May Perkins found Wade sitting on the porch of the boarding house, a bottle of whiskey resting between his boots. The sunset painted the sky in hues of copper and blood, the kind of colors that made old memories stir. May lowered herself into the chair beside him, her joints creaking like an old wagon. "You look like a man trying to wrestle ghosts. Guess I lost," Wade muttered. May took a sip from his bottle before handing it back. "I heard about your little offer. Brave thing to do. Foolish, too." "She wouldn't take it," he said flatly. "Said she don't take charity." May chuckled dryly. "That girl's got more pride than sense. But I've seen that look in your eyes, Wade. You're already halfway gone." He glanced at her. "Halfway where?" "Into trouble. Into feeling something again. Maybe both." He didn't deny it. May leaned back, folding her arms. "You ever lose someone, Wade?" His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "Wife, long time ago. She was sick. Nothing I could do." "That kind of hurt don't fade easy," May said. "But don't let it make you blind. That girl, she's fighting the world with her bare hands. Don't try to take her pride from her. Just stand close enough so when the world swings, she ain't alone." Wade let her words settle in the quiet air. He'd always been a man of action, not sentiment. But something about Akacheta's fire, her fierce, stubborn will, had lit something inside him he thought had gone cold long ago. Later that night, Wade found himself out by the corral behind the boarding house. The horses shifted restlessly under the moonlight. He leaned on the fence, watching the silvered hills in the distance. Somewhere beyond those hills lay his ranch, silent, empty, waiting, but the thought of going back alone filled him with a hollowness he couldn't name. From the shadows, a soft voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't drink so much." Wade turned. Akacheta stood a few paces away, wrapped in a shawl. The moonlight caught in her hair, turning it to black silk. "Didn't hear you walk up," he said. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You didn't." He hesitated, then asked, "You sleepin' any better?" She smiled faintly. "Sleep doesn't come easy after gunfire. Tell me about it." For a moment, they just stood there, the night stretching wide and quiet around them. The air smelled of sage and rain. "I was too harsh today," she said finally. "You didn't deserve that." "I've been called worse by better people," Wade replied. "I meant what I said, though," she continued. "I can't let a man fix what I need to earn. My father used to tell me that pride's the last thing they can't take from us. If I lose that..." She trailed off. Wade nodded slowly. "I ain't asking you to give it up. Just don't let it break you." She looked up at him, searching his face as if trying to decide whether to trust the words. "You talk like a man who's already been broken." "Maybe I was," he said quietly. "But sometimes you get lucky enough to find something worth mending for." Akacheta's eyes softened, the defiance in them melting into something quieter, something fragile. "Good night, Wade," she whispered. He tipped his hat. "Good night, Akacheta." When she was gone, Wade looked toward the dark hills again. The wind carried the scent of her shawl, smoke, pine, and wild sage. Faint, but haunting. May's words echoed in his head. "You're already halfway gone." And maybe she was right. Maybe he was. Because out here, where pride was a man's armor and loneliness his shadow, Wade Hollister realized he'd begun to want something he couldn't fight. Not with guns, not with grit, and not with the ghosts that still whispered his name when the wind turned cold. The morning came gray and cold, with a thin veil of fog curling low over the rooftops of whispering pines. The air smelled of wet timber and chimney smoke, the kind of day that carried the weight of something about to change. Wade Hollister stood outside the small, weather-beaten bank on Main Street, his hat pulled low and his jaw set hard. He wasn't a man who believed in gestures, but this one felt different. Necessary. He'd ridden into town before sunrise, before anyone could talk him out of it, before she could. Inside, the banker, Mr. Talbot, squinted behind his spectacles when Wade laid the heavy pouch of coins on the counter. "That's quite a sum, Mr. Hollister," he said, counting the silver and folded bills. "Belongs to Miss Akacheta, I presume?" "Not anymore," Wade said quietly. "Consider her debt paid in full." Talbot hesitated. "You sure about this? That land ain't worth the trouble it's caused." "Neither am I," Wade replied, tipping his hat. "But here we are." He signed the papers, shoved the receipt in his coat pocket, and walked out without another word. By the time Akacheta heard, the whole town already knew. May Perkins was the one who told her, half whisper, half warning. "He did it at first light, dear. Paid every dime you owed the bank." The color drained from Akacheta's face. She stood motionless for a long second, her breath shallow. What?" May's voice softened. "He meant well, child. You know that." But Akacheta barely heard her. The words had already burned their way inside her chest. When Wade returned to the boarding house that afternoon, the sky was low and heavy again, the clouds bruised with rain. He'd barely made it up the steps when the door flew open. Akacheta stood there, hair unbound, eyes blazing, her shawl slipping from her shoulders like a storm unraveling. "You had no right," she said, her voice trembling between anger and heartbreak. Wade froze, one hand still on the doorframe. "What are you talking about?" "You know damn well what I'm talking about," she snapped. "You went behind my back, paid off my father's land like it was some debt you could wash clean with money." He sighed, jaw tightening. "I was trying to help. You took away the only thing I had left, my fight." The words hit him harder than a bullet. She stepped closer, tears shining like frost in her eyes. "All my life, people have tried to take things from me. My name, my pride, my land, and now you took my fight." Wade tried to meet her gaze, but there was too much in it. Fury, sorrow, a lifetime of being forced to bow to someone else's will. "Akacheta," he said softly, "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to," she repeated, her voice breaking. "But you did." For a moment, they just stood there, silence heavy as thunder before a storm. Then, out of that stillness, her next words came like a shot. "If you want to save me," she said, staring straight into his eyes, "then marry me. That's the only way I'll accept your help." The room seemed to go still. The sound of the rain tapping against the window was the only thing that moved. Wade blinked, as if he hadn't heard her right. "Marry you?" "You wanted to help me," she said, chin high, eyes unwavering. "Then make it real. Make me your wife. That way the land's protected. Not charity, not pity." He studied her, searching for a hint of jest. But there was none. Only the stubborn fire he'd come to recognize. The same fire that had made her stand against Tillman, against half the town, against the whole damn world. "You don't know what you're asking?" he said finally. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Maybe I know exactly what I'm asking." Wade took off his hat, running a hand through his hair, the weight of the moment pressing hard on his chest. He'd made himself a promise years ago. No ties, no love, no more graves to dig. But promises had a way of fading when faced with something, someone, worth breaking them for. He looked up, eyes steady. "All right," he said. "If that's what you want. It's what needs to be done. Then we'll do it." The rain came steady the next morning, soft, gray, relentless. The small wooden church at the end of town stood quiet, except for the creak of its doors and the low hum of voices inside. Word had spread fast. A white rancher marrying an Apache girl? That kind of news didn't pass quietly in whispering pines. They gathered at the edge of the pews, townsfolk who came to watch not out of kindness, but curiosity. Some whispered behind gloved hands, others shook their heads. Madness. Sin. A waste of a good man. But Wade didn't hear them. He stood at the altar, broad shoulders squared beneath his worn coat, hat in hand, his boots tracking dust across the wooden floor. When Akacheta walked down the aisle, simple dress, hair braided with a strip of blue ribbon, every sound in the room faded. The preacher cleared his throat. "We gather here in the eyes of God." The words came slow, deliberate, each one echoing through the hollow rafters. When the time came to speak, Wade's voice was low but sure. "I do." Akacheta hesitated only a moment before repeating the same. "I do." No fancy rings, no flowers. Just two people bound by something stronger than pride, necessity maybe, but also the quiet understanding that somewhere between survival and surrender, they had found something worth holding on to. When it was done, they stepped outside into the rain. The sky had opened up, washing the dust from the streets and the whispers from behind them. The townspeople lingered under awnings, staring as the two of them stood there. A man and a woman the world said didn't belong together. Wade looked at her, water running down his face. and for the first time in years, he smiled without thinking. "Reckon that makes it official." Akacheta met his eyes, rain clinging to her lashes. "You sure you're ready for this kind of trouble, Mr. Hollister?" He tipped his hat, half grin, half truth. "Darlin', I was born for trouble." They rode out that afternoon, the rain following them past the edge of town and into the open hills. The land stretched wide and wild before them, painted in silver mist. At the ridge overlooking Wade's ranch, Akacheta stopped her horse. "This land, it feels alive." "It's rough country," he said. "Hard to live on, harder to leave." "Sounds like me," she whispered. He looked over, her profile sharp against the pale horizon, and something inside him settled, like a man who'd finally come home without meaning to. When they reached the ranch house, Wade helped her down, his hands lingering a moment longer than they should. She looked around, the barn, the fences, the quiet fields rolling toward the mountains, and nodded. "It's not much," he said. "It's enough." They stood there a moment, rain softening into drizzle, both knowing the road ahead would be far from easy. But as the clouds thinned and a streak of sunlight cut through, Wade found himself thinking of what May had said. "You're already halfway gone." She was right. Because whatever this was, love, defiance, redemption, he knew he was in it all the way now. And as they walked toward the porch, side by side, Wade reached up and brushed a drop of rain from her cheek. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hollister," he said. Akacheta smiled, the sound of her soft laughter mingling with the last patter of rain. The dawn light spilled over the ridges of whispering pines, washing the hills in gold. The sun climbed slow and proud, pushing shadows off the land, like a man clearing the dust from his boots. It was the kind of morning that made the air smell of pine sap and fresh earth, the kind of morning Wade Hollister used to wake to alone. But not anymore. Now, laughter echoed from somewhere near the barn. It wasn't the sound of hired hands or rowdy cowboys. It was the sound of children, small, wild, and free. Wade stood on the porch, a cup of coffee steaming in his hand, watching Akacheta chase a runaway colt across the pasture. Her hair caught the light like dark fire, the wind tugging at her shawl as she ran. She laughed, a bright, unguarded sound that reached him even from a distance. He smiled, shaking his head. That woman could tame a hurricane if she put her mind to it. Life on the ranch had changed in quiet, steady ways. Akacheta learned fast, how to ride bareback, mend fences, drive cattle, even rope a steer better than most men in the county. But it wasn't just the ranch she'd mended. It was the man himself. She turned the old place into something alive again. She planted flowers near the porch, hung a wooden wind chime that sang softly with the breeze. And every afternoon, after the work was done, she gathered the children from the valley, Apache, Mexican, white, half-blood, and taught them to read beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree. Her little schoolhouse was nothing more than a patch of dirt and a chalkboard nailed to a stump. But to those kids, it was a cathedral. They called her Teacher Akacheta, though most of them couldn't pronounce it right. Wade would sometimes linger at the edge of the field, pretending to fix a gate just to listen. Hearing her voice, calm, patient, proud, made something inside him ache and heal all at once. By midsummer, the town had begun to shift, too. Maybe it was the way Wade stood tall beside her at Sunday services. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, dignified and fearless, or how the children she taught started walking through town heads held high. Whatever it was, people began to look at her differently, not as the half-Apache outcast, but as Mrs. Hollister. Even old May Perkins said it best one morning at the mercantile. Funny thing about respect, she told a neighbor. "You can't demand it, but if you stand long enough in the storm, folks start remembering who kept their ground." That same summer, word came that Frank Tillman had been arrested in Santa Fe, caught running guns across reservation borders, sentenced to 10 years hard labor. When Wade heard, he didn't celebrate. He simply poured himself a drink on the porch and stared at the horizon. Akacheta joined him, sitting close enough that their shoulders brushed. "He's gone then?" she asked quietly. "Looks that way." She nodded. "You think it changes anything?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "Maybe not, but it's a start." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then let's start there." The sky burned orange and violet as the sun set behind the hills. Somewhere beyond the fence, coyotes sang, and for the first time in years, the sound didn't feel lonely. Years rolled by like cattle through the valley. Seasons changed, storms came and went. The ranch grew, a few more acres fenced, a few more heads of cattle. But the biggest change wasn't measured in land or livestock. It was in the sound of two small voices calling from the doorway. James and Liana, their children, were proof that two worlds could meet and make something better. James had his father's quiet strength. Liana her mother's wild eyes and fierce will. Together they carried both bloodlines, both legacies, neither ashamed nor divided. Sometimes, when Wade watched them chase each other across the pasture, he'd feel a lump in his throat he couldn't quite name. He wasn't a man of fancy words, but deep down, he knew this. He'd spent half a lifetime building fences, and she'd taught him how to open gates. On cold winter nights, when the snow pressed against the windows and the fire crackled low, Wade would sit in his chair with a blanket over his knees. Akacheta would be across from him, reading aloud by lamplight. The children would fall asleep nearby, James curled up with the dog, Liana clutching her mother's braid like a lifeline. Outside, the wind howled through the canyons, but inside, there was warmth. A peace he hadn't thought possible for a man like him. Sometimes, he'd catch himself staring at her, the curve of her face, the steady rhythm of her voice, and wonder how he'd ever lived without it. And every now and then, she'd glance up from her book, smile faintly, and say, "What are you looking at, old man?" He'd grin back. Just counting blessings. Years later, when their hair had silvered and the world around them had started to move faster than they could keep up, Wade would still wake before dawn. He'd sit on that same porch, wrapped in his old coat, watching the sun climb over the hills. The land looked the same, wild, stubborn, beautiful. But he was different. Once, he'd thought the West was nothing but dust and ghosts. Now it was laughter, firelight, and the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. Akacheta would step out behind him, still graceful despite the years. She'd hand him a cup of coffee and settle into the chair beside his. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked one morning. He smiled, lines creasing around his eyes. "Which one?" "The day you rode into town." He chuckled low. "Reckon I'll never forget it. Went for salt and bullets, came home with a wife." She laughed, soft and warm as the sunrise. He turned to her, voice dropping to a whisper. "I rode into town for supplies, but came home with everything I didn't know I needed." Her eyes glistened in the golden light. She reached out, brushed a hand over his cheek, and said in her father's tongue, "Inawi, you came home." And in that simple phrase, Wade felt the weight of every mile he'd ridden, every ghost he'd buried, every storm he'd survived. He had come home, not to a house or a piece of land, but to her, to the family they'd built, to a life that had finally stopped running. As the wind whispered through the pines, Wade looked out over the ranch one last time, The cattle grazing, the children's laughter rising from the meadow, the faint smoke curling from the chimney. And he thought about how some journeys don't start with a map, but with a heartbeat. He turned to the horizon, eyes soft but steady, and asked quietly, maybe to the land, maybe to himself, maybe to the sky. When you've lost everything, how far would you ride to find your way home again?